A leading ethical hacker tells us what cyber threats to watch for on this week's Medical Economics Pulse.
It's tricking the user to click a link, tricking the user to give information, tricking a user to transfer money from an account. They all are twists on the same attack, right? And so really, the solution is the same. Pay attention.
Each year, millions of medical records are stolen by hackers. Will your hospital or practice be the next victim? The scary truth is that hackers are targeting your practice, and they are often a step ahead of you. They use sophisticated methods to steal medical records, which are extremely valuable on the black market. And every organization is at risk, from the largest hospital to the smallest solo practice. The key to defending yourself is to understand the latest threats. Our own Silas Inman sat down with cybersecurity expert Kevin Johnson to discuss how hackers are targeting your practice and what you can do to stop them.
Welcome, it's great to have you today.
Thank you very much.
So first, let's just put this whole thing into perspective. So can you just what are some of the threats that are out there for a practicing physician?
It's actually pretty sad that the threats facing practicing physicians are the same threats facing so many other people, and yet there's this lack of knowledge or awareness about it. The biggest threat they're facing is actually just email-based, right? We refer to it as social engineering, right? It's an attack where they send an email in pretending to be something to get the doctor, the physician, to do something, right? And I'm being vague because it could be whatever they want. In some cases, it's send me records. In other cases, it's transfer money from this account over to this other account, or what have you. That, I think, is the biggest threat that most physicians are facing, is that type of attack. Beyond that, it's malware. Ransomware, malware. You click a link or you download something you think is going to help you with your job or whatever, and instead it compromises your system and hands control of it back to an attacker.
So in your experience, have you found that a lot of medical practices might be behind some other institutions, or where are they at in the spectrum?
I would say that the medical practices are probably in the worse shape than any of the other industries I work in. All right, we work with lots of different verticals, and when we work with doctors and hospitals and what have you, in most cases, their security is so far behind everybody else's that it's sad. It makes sense though, right? Because their primary job is not using that computer. In most practices, the computer systems, even with electronic health records and what have you, it's an accessory, I think is the right way to put it, right? That laptop or that computer in the treatment room isn't required for the treatment. It's required to help with everything else afterwards, and so it's just not thought of as important to fix.
So you mentioned medical practices are some of those in the worst shape, but at the same time, looking at the grand scheme of the value of the data, what is the value of a medical record?
What makes medical records even more valuable, though, is that there isn't any way to track them. So I'm sure you've run your credit report, right? There's advertising on TV. There's mobile apps that you can pull down that'll tell you your score right this second is 47 million. It's not, but right. All about financial records.
Sure.
The banks track credit card transactions and stuff like that. Let me ask you, could you tell me right now where the last time your health insurance was used?
No, probably
Right?
couldn't. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
And while the health insurance companies are trying to track fraud, right, there really is no central warehouse for this information. We don't have an Equifax for health records, right? And I'm not sure I'm recommending an Equifax for health records, but because of that lack of detection, if somebody who's bad steals a health record, they can keep it active for much longer than credit cards or other types of data. And that raises the value, right?
Right. So there's phishing emails, there's malware, there's ransomware. It seems like there's always something new that pops up whenever we find a solution for one, something new comes around.
They're actually not new.
Sure.
They're new names. It all boils down to tricking a person into doing something, right? Ransomware is malware. The only difference is, malware, for the most part, was designed to spread and cause problems.
Sure.
Ransomware spreads, causes problems, and then demands a ransom, right? Phishing, it's tricking the user to click a link, tricking the user to give information, tricking the user to transfer money from an account. They all are twists on the same attack, right? And so really, the solution is the same. Pay attention, right? And I hate to say it that way. I would normally say, use common sense, but we all know that common sense is not that common.
Right.
And so what we tell people is start trying to recognize when it's an attack, not the technical details, right? Like, oh, that URL or that link doesn't look right. I don't expect a doctor who's busy and treating people and dealing with stuff, she doesn't have time to examine the link to know if it's right? So what we tell people is to start looking for the signs that it's fraudulent. And one of the biggest ones is that there's a sense of urgency to it, right? When we do the attacks, as we talked about previously, my job, companies hire me and I do the attacks they would go under with a real attacker, break in, steal the stuff, and then I show them how I did it so that they know what they need to fix, right? Okay, let's focus your attention here so you can fix this. And so when I do those attacks, it's always something that has a deadline, right? Hey, if you don't get me this information by 2 o'clock today, the world's gonna end, or, right? And every single one of those attacks is based on trying to drive urgency. One of the ones we did that was actually pretty successful, we would just send receipts for travel expenses. And all of a sudden you'd get a letter, and it would be from Expedia or Delta or whatever, right? And it would say, great purchase, your flight to Alaska is now booked, and we've charged your credit card $3,500, right? Did you book a flight to Alaska? No, right? Do you have $3,500 just to throw away? Probably not, right? And if you do, we need to talk later. But right? But so it gives you this. Oh man, I'm gonna have trouble paying my mortgage or my rent or my bills or whatever. I need to fix this right now. And what you saw was, and we actually watched it. One of the times we did this attack while we were in the office, so we could see the people react to it, right? And you saw multiple people in the office like freak out, grab their phones, start calling people, start clicking links. They started doing all this stuff. And it was like, you realize that 10 people in this office all got the same email that said but they didn't talk to each other, right? They weren't like, hey, did you get that email? Did you? Yeah. No, they all freaked out. They all clicked the link. And of course, when they clicked the link, we asked them for their password. They gave it to us, right? They would actually, sometimes they would reply to the email, and then we'd have a whole conversation with them. And like we would get somebody who would like, hey, send us these medical records. And they would say, okay, I'll send them to you. And we'll say, okay, but to be secure, zip them up and put a password on it and text me the password, right? And so we're the attacker, but we're telling them to do it more securely, right? And they would do it, and they would like have some trouble, and we would teach them how to do it. We'd walk them through the steps, and then they would text us the password. But of course, it was to a phone number that wasn't ours, right? So we would write them back and say, "Oh man, I don't know what happened, but I didn't get that message. Could you just email me the password?" And they would, because we'd give them the urgency. We would give them some feel good. Hey, we're doing this securely, right? But we're still the attacker.
Interesting. Yeah, so in a physician's practice, when you're doing some of these audits, what is the most common red flag that you see that people should really stop doing?
I hate to say it, stop sharing passwords.
Sure.
Every practice we go into, They've got passwords on Post-it notes on their monitors. I was in a doctor's office, and I was there for treatment, not as part of my job. And I go in, it was the first visit, I was doing an MRI, right? And I go in, I guess I'm not supposed to say that I was doing an MRI. I go in and I'm signing up, and the lady behind the counter was having trouble getting into the record system.
Right.
And so she yells across the office. Like, there's a full waiting room, right? And she's like, hey, my password's not working. And the guy over in the other, like the other workspace, he's like, oh, use mine. And he yells back his username, and I'm standing there like, do I write it down? Do I say something?
Sure.
Right? And let's be clear, they know what I do for a living.
Right.
Right? They had a whole conversation with me about my job right before they started yelling a password back and forth. Right? And the password was weak. So the problem with that is they're doing a practice that isn't safe.
Right.
And that tells me they're not thinking about security. So they're more liable to fall, right, for one of these attacks. Because they're trying, like this woman, she's yelling for a password because she's in a rush. She's got a patient standing in front of her. I get it, right? Like, you got a job, you got to do this stuff. We look for things like that. We look for other bad practices.
Sure.
The number of times I walk into a doctor's office and their computer is unlocked, right? I ask doctors now, right? I ask, hey, are you using two-factor authentication? No. Why not? Right? It takes 5 seconds to set it up and use it. It's a pain in the butt. It's not really. You get used to it, right? So we look for stuff like that. The other thing that if I was running a practice, I would look for is, I want to be very clear. I'm not saying you have to hire some expensive IT people.
Sure.
But if your entire infrastructure is run by your Uncle Joe's cousin Nancy's friend, right? It's probably not secure. Think about who you have building these systems and running them and maintaining them, if anybody. Right? And like I said, you don't have to go hire some fancy person, but know who they are. If they know what they're doing, right? Those are the things we look for.
Sure. And so you see a lot of the headlines that come out about these big institutions that get hit. But is this only something for big institutions?
No.
Can a little hospital get hit
The
as well?
little hospitals are actually getting hit more. The doctors' practices are getting hit more. That's just not headline generating.
Right.
Saying, Dr. Smallwood got ransomware. That was my pediatrician.
Sure.
I don't know why his name popped into my head, but let's go with it, right? So, Dr. Smallwood got hit with ransomware. Isn't going to be in the New York Times. As much as I liked the guy, he wasn't famous.
It is happening, yes.
It's actually happening at a faster rate than at the big hospitals
Sure.
and at the big practices.
Right. So there's always these trends of these big ones that come through, like NotPetya and all these.
Yeah.
What's the current fad in the hacking world?
I'll tell you that it's still ransomware.
Okay.
Ransomware is successful. There's a whole bunch of different variants, right?
Sure.
If doctors know about viruses and things like that, it's the same thing, right? The flu is the flu is the flu. There's 47 million different strains of the flu. The same thing with ransomware. Ransomware is ransomware, but there's 47 million strains of it. And so that's the biggest thing right now that people are getting hit with. It's also the most disruptive because a lot of the attacks that happened before ransomware, the attacker had a vested interest in not breaking your system. Because if they broke your system, they lost access to it, right? And so they were trying to keep that access. Ransomware flipped that on its side, and it purposely breaks the system in exchange for some form of money, right? And that's one of the reasons why it's so much worse. We worked with doctors' offices, other industries too, where they would be infected with malware for decades and not realize it. But because the malware didn't break anything, it just kept stealing data or resources, right? They didn't notice. Ransomware comes in, you're done, right? It shuts it down. That's the big one.
Okay, so a lot of physicians almost view getting hacked as a natural disaster. It's going to happen. I have no control over it. But what can they do?
I think that's a horrible attitude.
Sure.
I understand it, right?
Sure.
Like being hacked is inevitable. Nah, it's not really, but
Sure.
it is likely that
Sure.
you'll get hit with something. I think the big thing is, don't just throw up your hands and say, I can't do anything. Pay attention, right? Try to be more secure. Going back to the password idea, right? Have you turned on two-factor authentication everywhere you can, right? Yes? Great. You just made the attacker's job way harder, right? Are you stopping sharing accounts? Yes? Awesome. Are you not clicking on links in email, right? Are you not responding? Are you, one of the things I like to tell people to do is, anytime you get an email or a phone call or whatever that sounds really urgent, just sit down for 30 seconds, relax a little bit. Find out if at the end of 30 seconds it still feels that urgent, right? The other thing to do is to imagine the person who wrote the email was standing right in front of you, right? Because for some reason, if I walk into a doctor's office and I say, wire $10,000 from your primary account to this random account number,
Right.
the doctors would be like, forget you.
Yeah.
Like, who are you? What do you want, right? But if I send an email that says, wire $10,000 to this account, they do, right? So I always tell people, imagine the person was in front of you.
Sure.
What would you do? Would you react the way you're reacting right now, right? If the answer is yes, okay, then do it, right?
Sure.
Like if the answer is no, or you're probably not, look into it a little deeper, right? If it's a message from somebody that you know, right, or an organization that you do business with, call them, right? Take an extra second, or have your assistant call them, whatever, right? But do some form of verification. We call it out of band. So don't just reply to the message, right? Because if you reply to the message I sent, guess who you're sending it to?
Right.
Me.
Right.
and I'm going to reply back nicely.
Yeah.
So call the person, right? If you get a message that says that you have to do your benefits, right? That's a big one we do. We'll send out, hey, it's benefit enrollment time, sign up. Or if it says it's from an insurance provider that you take, right? You use them for your practice, right? Go out to the website. See if there's a message there that says, because if they've sent you an email that says, hey, we have this problem, when you log into your account on their site, that same message should be there, right? If it's an attacker, it won't be, because I don't have access to put the message there.
Sure.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
So
we talked about how the kind of misconception, it's inevitable that you're going to get hacked. What are some other common misconceptions that are out there?
There's two that are very related. That it's either fat neckbeard guy in his mother's basement hacking people, so we don't care, or it's China, right, or Russia, right? You've got this spectrum, and the reality is it's everybody, right? So that's a big misconception. One of the most damaging misconceptions, I think, is, and you touched on it, right? The headlines are about the big organizations, right? Target got hacked, Equifax got hacked, Baptist got, right, whatever, right? They don't talk about the small practices. And so a lot of people feel that they're safe because why would somebody attack me? Why would, I'm a practice, I've got maybe one doctor working there or 3 doctors, and you got a few nurses and a PA or whatever, right? And there's 10 people in this practice. Why would somebody hack me, right? And the answer is because you got data. And not only do you have data, but you have resources and connections and money, and it is very unlikely that you have a dedicated security staff focused on stuff, right? And so that's why they're going after you, right? They may not even be targeting you particularly. They could be just sending it mass attack out to so many people, trying to get, it's why we call it fishing, right? When they throw a big net over the side of a boat on deadliest catch, right? They're not targeting that crab,
Right.
right? They're targeting all of them.
Sure.
And so we've seen attacks when we've worked incidents and stuff like that, where, have you ever gotten that email that says, hey, do you want a list of every physician that you could market to?
I have actually, yes.
Yeah.
I get those every day.
Everybody
Yeah,
gets
yeah,
those
yeah.
emails, right? The attackers get those lists?
Yeah.
And they mail out the attacks to all those
Okay.
physicians, right?
Sure.
They'll, in many cases, the attackers will actually hack those companies and get the lists, and that's a different story. But they'll target 1 million practices
Sure.
with the hope that 100 of them will fall for the attack.
Right.
And so that's why.
Sure.
That big misconception is I'm too small to be attacked. Nobody wants me. I don't have anything that people want. I'm safe
Sure.
in my obscurity.
Right.
And that's not it's not true.
So if I'm a small practice in Idaho, what is my first steps? How do I get started in taking control of this?
So the first step is first step is to recognize that you're a target, okay? That people are coming after you. The second step is to figure out what you have, okay? Like the fax question. Do you have a normal old fax machine, or do you have a fax machine that's tied to your printer, tied to your copier,
Right.
tied to your network, okay? Find out who's managing this, right? A lot of people are like, oh, you know what I do? If I got a problem, I take it to, I don't know, Best Buy, right? And I get them to fix it. I go to the Apple store, and I go to the Genius Bar, and they fix it, right? That's how they manage their entire practice. Or Uncle Joey's cousin Nancy runs everything, right? So find out who's responsible for your systems.
Right.
A lot of times the physician doesn't know. Somebody else in the office manages that. Right. Find out who they are and ask them, what are they doing, right? How are they protecting data? How are they maintaining? The next thing, and this is a hard one, okay? Only keep the data you need. Right? Everybody seems to be, hoarders of data, right? We don't want to delete that email because I might have to prove I was right 10 years from now, right? Or we don't want to erase that file because it's important. I mean, how many computers do you walk up to and there's 4,000 icons on the desktop, right? I can't delete it. I need it, right? As an attacker, now of course I only do it with permission, right?
Sure.
But as an attacker, I love those computers. I break into systems and they've got data on it from 20 years ago. And you know the best part about that is? The social security number of that patient 20 years ago is still their social security number, right? The medical records for that patient 20 years ago, they're still valid for that patient, right? All that kind of information is out there. We get into your email and we look at all the emails you've sent when you signed up for this service and that service and this other service. We now know all of the other systems we can get to, right? So what we tell people is stop hoarding this data, right? Most data that you keep, you don't need, right? Delete it. Stop hoarding stuff. The data that you do need to keep, now start thinking about why. Right? Those are the first few steps. As you go down the path, we can get into technical details and stuff like that. And then the final thing is, and this is something that just you never stop, be aware you're a target. Right. Be aware people are coming after you. Not paranoid, right? We're not wearing tinfoil hats and looking over our shoulders and shutting off all the wireless in the world, right? But understand that attacks happen. Understand that you can fall for them. And as long as you keep that in your mind, you should be much better than most people.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about what individual physicians could do, but what, as a whole, what could the healthcare industry, what should they be doing to raise awareness of this?
One, raising awareness is important. Telling people, talking about it. One of the things I find, I do presentations. I'll go out to conferences and I'll speak and I talk at practices all the time. And it's amazing to me how many times I get told afterwards, man, I didn't know people could do that, or I didn't know, right? Like there's this, I know security is out there, and then there's I now know how that attack happened, and right? So I tell stories all the time. We talking, oh, when I hacked that bank and did that, or when I did this, right? And that's what I think the healthcare industry has to do. I think that we've seen efforts with that, right, of education and pushing stuff. But it really is what it boils down to is, as a whole, we need to take into account this is important. It's serious data, it's important data, it's sensitive data, not just from a privacy perspective, but from the damage we could do to people if it got out, right? And then start protecting it. That's what we need to do.
All right, well, thank you very much.